Hey guys, tonight we step into the marble-paved streets of ancient Rome not as senators, not as gladiators, but as humble citizens, just trying to answer nature's call without stepping in anything too unfortunate. Picture it. The warm Mediterranean. Sun beating down, the chatter of market vendors, the occasional whiff of olive oil mingling with less pleasant aromas. You're strolling along, sandals slapping against dusty stones, when that familiar feeling hits. Yep, it's time. But don't expect a cozy private bathroom with scented candles and a lock on the door. No. In Rome, you're headed for a bustling, echoing public toilet, a place where privacy is a concept as foreign as, well, toilet paper. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this experience with your dignity fully intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the communal. Latrine, trying not to breathe too deeply. The building is grander than you'd expect for such a humble purpose stone. Columns frame the entrance. Mosaics decorate the floor. Inside, a long marble bench stretches along the walls, punctuated by keyhole-shaped openings. No divider, no doors, just a row of holes, shoulder to shoulder with your fellow Romans. Strangers and friends alike, all united in the most human of needs. The soundscape is vivid, a chorus of splashes, sighs, and awkward throat clearing. Someone's humming a popular tune. Someone else is attempting casual conversation. Historians still argue whether this constant chitchat was a cultural norm, or a desperate attempt to mask the awkwardness of it all. You glance around and spot a bucket of water and a stick with a sponge at the end. For now, you shuffle to an empty space and lower yourself carefully, the cool marble shocking against your thighs. You're surrounded by all walks of Roman life. A baker, still dusted in flour. A soldier, polishing his dagger. A merchant counting coins. Even a well-dressed gentleman clutching a scroll, probably rehearsing a speech to the Senate while relieving himself. You realize there's a certain egalitarian charm here, everyone, no matter their status, answers nature's call. Same way, but let's not romanticize too much. The smell? Oh, it's there. Even with clever drainage beneath your feet, the mixture of human waste, damp stone, whatever perfume people dabbed under their noses to cope, it's unforgettable. Yet Rome took pride in these facilities. The famous foricae weren't just places to, well, go, they were social hubs. Places to share gossip, make deals, and debate politics. It's the kind of place where you might overhear a juicy bit of scandal while minding your own business. Or, given. The acoustics be the unfortunate star of someone else's gossip. And speaking of acoustics, imagine the echoes. Every sound seems amplified, bouncing off the walls and columns in a strange symphony of splashes and murmurs. It's like the world's least appealing concert hall. You wonder, briefly, whether the architects considered this when they designed the space. Probably not. Or maybe they did, because nothing says Rome like turning even bodily functions into a grand communal affair. Now, if you're imagining that everyone politely waited their turn, think again. At peak time, say, after a big festival or during market days, people jostled for spots. There were no neat queues. It's just a sort of unspoken pecking order, where the elderly or higher status individuals might command a seat faster. But ultimately, it was every Roman for themselves. And yes, people did fall in sometimes. Slips happened. Let's not dwell too much on that, though. Just watch your step. Outside. Water constantly flowed beneath the latrines, part of the ingenious Roman sewer system, the cloaca maxima. Great sewer carried waste away from the city, out toward the Tiber River. This marvel of engineering kept the streets cleaner than many later European cities would manage for centuries. Still, historians debate whether it was as effective as Roman writers claimed, or if that was just clever propaganda to show off their city's superiority. Meanwhile, you might notice small details, carved decorations of dolphins or sea gods. Along the benches, A reminder that even in the most functional spaces, Rome couldn't resist a bit of flair. And if you're lucky, the toilet attendant might have sprinkled some herbs or incense near the doorway in a valiant effort to improve the atmosphere. Emphasis on valiant. So as you settle in, try not to think too much about what's flowing beneath your feet or about the stranger beside you humming as if this were a perfectly normal way to spend an afternoon. Just focus on the breeze coming through the doorway, the distant sound of a lyre, maybe even the comforting hum of city life beyond these walls. After all, in Rome, even going to the toilet was a shared experience, one that united rich and poor, young and old, citizen and visitor alike. Now, since you're already perched on that cold marble bench, feeling the breeze through the open doorway and trying not to make eye contact with the guy beside you, let's turn our attention to that infamous Roman toilet accessory, the tersorium. There it is, resting in a shallow dish of water, as innocent-looking as a kitchen utensil. But don't let appearances fool you. That humble stick with a sponge tied at the end. It's about to be your best friend or your worst nightmare. You glance at it, then at the bucket of water, maybe vinegar, maybe salt water, maybe something stronger, depending on how fancy this latrine is. Historians still argue whether vinegar was actually standard, or just something later writers imagined in their idealized versions of Roman hygiene. Either way, that sponge's job is clear. It's the ancient equivalent of toilet paper. A reusable, communal, not terribly sanitary bit of kit that everyone in this toilet is expected to share. Yes, share. I'll give you a second to process that. So here's how it works. You do your business. You reach for the tersorium. You give it a good swish in the bucket, or you hope the last guy did, and then you well clean up. Then you rinse it again, hopefully thoroughly, and leave it for the next unfortunate soul. If you're thinking, surely someone had the bright idea to bring their own sponge. Yes, some did. A savvy Roman might carry a personal sponge in a little pot, like the ancient equivalent of bringing your own wet wipes to a music festival. But for most people, communal tools were the norm. And while we're here, let's talk technique. Because this was no casual swipe-and-go situation. The sponge was soft, yes, but Roman writers sometimes joked about the awkwardness of using it. I don't think you can just dab and dash. A good, thorough, clean mattered, especially in a world where tunics were light-colored, and, well, stains would show. Even the gods were watching, or so people believed. Some Roman superstitions claimed that being careless in your toilet habits could invite misfortune or illness. No pressure. Now, you might notice that the sponge sticks don't all look the same. Some are worn down, the sponge is frayed and sad, like they've seen too much. Others are newer. The sponge is still plush and full. The attendances, there were attendants for this, were supposed to replace the sponges as needed. But imagine being the person whose job it was to collect used sponge sticks, clean them, and set them back out. Not exactly the glamorous life of a Roman citizen, is it? Here's a fun or horrifying tidbit. There's a story from Roman writer Seneca about a Germanic gladiator who, in a fit of despair, seized a tersorium and used it to end his own life in the most gruesome way imaginable. Now, historians still debate whether this tale is true or just one of those sensational stories meant to shock Roman audiences. Either way, it's given that humble sponge stick a rather grim reputation in the annals of toilet history. Meanwhile, as you contemplate picking up that tersorium, you're struck by how normal all this feels to the people around you. The baker wipes his brow, gives the sponge a casual dunk, and goes about his day. The soldier beside him chats about last night's dice game while handling the stick with the same nonchalance you'd use stirring a pot of soup. It's a reminder that what seems horrifyingly unsanitary to us today was just everyday life in ancient Rome. The sponge stick wasn't just a cleaning tool, it was part of Rome's whole public hygiene system. The latrines were often located near bathhouses or along aqueduct lines so that fresh water could continually wash through the channels beneath your feet, helping to carry away waste and, theoretically, keep things cleaner. The flow beneath your marble seat gurgles softly, a strange sort of comfort in this very exposed moment. Still, no amount of running water could entirely mask the smell or the risk. Parasites and infections were common, despite Rome's advanced engineering. And if you're wondering about diseases spreading via shared sponges, congratulations, you've hit on one of the big scholarly debates. Some argue that these practices were a public health disaster. Others say the constant flow of water helped. Mitigate the worst of it. You shift on your bench, noticing the cool dampness that never quite leaves these places. There's moss growing in the cracks of the stone, and faint graffiti scratched into the walls. A crude drawing here, a name there, maybe even a warning not to trust the sponge. Carved by some ancient wag who knew exactly how you're feeling right now. So what do? You could try to wait until the latrine clears out and clean yourself in private. But given the steady stream of visitors, that's unlikely. You could pretend you're done and shuffle out, hoping no one notices you've skipped a crucial step. Or you could take a deep breath, preferably through your mouth, grab the sponge stick like a true Roman, and get it over with. Just don't think too hard about where that sponge has been, or whose hands last held it, or what that faint stain might be, actually. On second thought, thinking is overrated. Outside, life continues. A fruit vendor hawks fresh figs. Street. Performer strums a lyre. The world doesn't care about your sponge-related anxiety. Maybe that's the best lesson of all. Sometimes, you just have to go with the flow, literally. As you step out of the bustling public latrine, you inhale deeply, grateful for the comparatively fresh air of the street. Even if that fresh air carries the faint aroma of roasting chestnuts mixed with damp stone and the occasional whiff from the nearest open sewer grate. You dust off your tunic and glance toward the grand villas perched on the Palatine Hill. You know, the kind of places where the rich and powerful of Rome lived, in luxury that would make your shared marble bench seem downright barbaric. And tonight, lucky you're about to get a glimpse of how the Roman elite handled their, let's say, most personal business. Picture yourself stepping through the grand entrance of a patrician's villa, cool mosaics underfoot. It's frescoes on the walls depicting gods and heroes, and an air of quiet opulence that's miles removed from the noisy foricae. You're greeted by the soft trickle of water from an indoor fountain, maybe the scent of imported incense wafting from a corner brazier, and somewhere in this elegant space, a private toilet, because yes, the wealthiest Romans didn't always rub shoulders with the masses when nature called. These elite toilets were often tucked discreetly near the kitchen or bathing area. A small room with a stone or wooden seat, and if the owner had truly embraced the best of Roman plumbing, a connection to the same sewer lines that served the public latrines. But here's the thing. Not all private toilets were created equal. Some were downright luxurious, with carved seats, decorative niches for oils and perfumes, and even small frescoes or mosaics to keep your mind entertained during your visit. Historians still argue whether some of these private loos were used, mainly by the owners themselves, or left for the servants and household staff, while the master of the house opted for the social buzz of the public toilet, because, believe it or not, for some Romans, the public latrine was where the real action happened. Deals struck, alliances formed, and gossip gathered. But let's say this villa owner prefers his private comforts. You enter his modest little toilet chamber, and notice the clever design. A sloped floor so water can wash everything clean. A small gutter bringing fresh water from the nearest cistern, and that ever-present sponge on a stick resting in its pot. And yes, despite the wealth, the sponge is still the standard toolsome things. It seems even money couldn't change. But maybe the sponge here is softer, newer, or swapped out more frequently by an attentive slave, whose entire job is managing the household's sanitation needs. Spare a thought for that guy in some truly grand homes. Archaeologists have even found hints of two-seaters, because why answer nature's call alone when you could share the moment with a friend or family member? Imagine that. Reclining in a lovely frescoed chamber, chatting about the latest gladiator match while perched on adjoining toilet seats. The Romans truly elevated the concept of multitasking, and speaking of multitasking, consider the sheer convenience. Some villas had toilets right off the dining room, because nothing says luxury like being able to pop out mid-feast without having to navigate your way to a public latrine. There's at least one famous example in Pompeii where the toilet opened directly into the kitchen. Efficient, yes, but perhaps not ideal from a modern food safety perspective. Still, for the Roman elite, practicality often trumped what we might consider tasteful. You run your hand along the cool wall of this private toilet chamber and notice traces of red paint, part of a decorative scheme. Perhaps they're simply the remains of some long-faded mural. Maybe the image of a protective deity, because even in the bathroom, Romans liked to feel the gods had their back. Some families dedicated little altars near the toilet to household spirits, just in case a careless moment might offend a lurking spirit or attract bad luck. And if you're wondering whether this seems a little excessive, well, think of all the strange superstitions we carry today about knocking on wood or avoiding walking under ladders. The Romans were no different. Of course, all this comfort came at a price. Installing and maintaining private plumbing wasn't cheap. Those pipes often made of lead because what could possibly go wrong needed regular care, and connecting to the sewer system required city approval. There's evidence that some elite homes had their own septic pits instead, cleaned out periodically by unfortunate workers whose job descriptions were, let's just say, less than glamorous. And don't think for a moment that having a private toilet meant you were entirely safe from the hazards of Roman waste management. Rats, snakes, and even the odd escaped eel from the kitchen drainage channels could find their way up through the pipes. There's at least one Roman writer who tells of a man bitten in a rather delicate area by a snake that had slithered up from the sewers. Historians still debate whether that's a bit of dramatic exaggeration or a terrifying slice of reality. So as you imagine yourself seated comfortably in this well-appointed little room, perhaps admiring the view out a small high window or enjoying the faint scent of rosemary from the nearby garden, remember, the rich may have had marble seats and decorative frescoes, but when it came down to it, their bathroom breaks weren't so different from yours in the public latrine. A sponge is still a sponge after all, and that snake? Well, let's just say you might want to glance down once in a while. Now, let's leave behind the perfumed privacy of elite villas. Follow the crowds to one of the most iconical and chaotic locations in ancient Rome, the Colosseum. Imagine it, a sea of excited spectators crammed onto stone seats, the roar of 50,000 voices rising like a wave as gladiators clash below. The air smells of sweat, roasted nuts, and spilled wine, with a hint of something less pleasant, carried on the breeze because with that many people packed together for hours on end, bathroom breaks weren't just a courtesy, they were a logistical necessity. You're here somewhere up in the middle tiers, enjoying the spectacle when nature calls. And unlike in your modern stadium with its neat rows of toilets and orderly lines, you have to navigate your way through a maze of shouting vendors, sloshing amphorae of cheap wine, and the occasional dozing spectator to reach the nearest latrine. There's no polite waiting area. There's no attendants handing out paper towels, just a darkened corridor beneath the stands, where a row of stone seats awaits. And oh, what seats they are. Simple, functional, and packed in tight because space is at a premium. There's no door, no cubicle, just you and dozens of fellow fans, all hoping to get back to their seats before they miss something spectacular in the arena. You sit, the stone cool against your skin, and try to ignore the muffled cheers and groans from above as another combatant falls. Or maybe it's an animal lions, bears, and leopards were all part of the show. The Romans loved a good spectacle, and historians still argue whether these games were more about religious ritual or sheer public entertainment. Either way, no one wants to miss the main event because of an ill-timed toilet trip. The Colosseum latrines had to be efficient. Water channels beneath the seats carried waste away, much like in the city's public toilets, though here the system worked overtime during packed events. The constant flow helped reduce the smell, but let's be honest, it was still there. The combined aroma of thousands of sweaty spectators, animal pens nearby, and the ever-present undercurrent of human waste wasn't something easily masked. No matter how many sprigs of rosemary or sage you tucked behind your ear, you glance down and see the familiar sponge sticks resting in buckets of vinegar or salt water. Yes, even in the grand amphitheater, the trusty tersorium made an appearance. You might wonder whether anyone actually paused to clean the sponge properly in the rush to return to their seats. The answer, probably not always. After all, the tension of the games, the shouts from above, the danger of missing a particularly dramatic moment, these were powerful incentives to hurry. And let's not forget, these facilities weren't just for the paying customers. Gladiators, animal handlers, and workers who kept the complex running all had to make use of them too. Somewhere down in the hypogeum, the labyrinth of tunnels beneath the arena, there were likely makeshift latrines for the men waiting to fight, or for the slaves managing the lifts and trapdoors. Imagine their nerves, pacing in the dark, listening to the distant roar of the crowd, and trying to calm themselves with a quick visit to a rough pit latrine before facing whatever terror awaited them in the arena. In fact, some archaeologists believe that small drainage channels in the hypogeum served double duty, disposing of both animal waste and human waste from those who worked and waited below. It's not hard to picture the grim conditions: damp stone, flickering torchlight, and the constant reminder that death might be just moments away. If you think about it, the Colosseum's toilets probably saw as much fear and desperation as the arena itself. And while we're down here, let's address one of the more curious theories, that some of the latrines may have been used as informal confessionals of sorts, places where gladiators or spectators whispered prayers or curses, hoping for divine intervention in the outcome of a match. Historians still debate whether this was common practice or just a romantic notion cooked up by later writers. But given the superstitious nature of Roman society, it wouldn't be surprising. The gods, after all, were everywhere, even in the toilet. You finish up, rinse the sponge stick, or at least make a token effort, and rejoin the surge of people returning to the stands. As you squeeze through the crowd, you pass vendors selling snacks, fig cakes, sausages, honeyed nuts, and can't help but marvel at the Roman stomach's resilience. Because after what you've just seen and smelled, the last thing you want is a snack. But for the average Roman, business as usual. So there you are, back in your seat, catching the tail end of a chariot parade or the opening blow of a new gladiator bout. Around you the crowd roars again, the whole massive structure vibrating with energy. All down in the hidden corridors and stone channels. The latrines keep quietly working, carrying away the less glamorous side of the Empire's greatest show. You manage to extricate yourself from the swirling crowds of the Colosseum, still faintly aware of the clamor echoing behind you. Find yourself wandering toward one of the city's bustling marketplaces. The Forum Boreum, perhaps, or the chaotic stalls near the Circus Maximus, where the air thrums with haggling voices, clinking coins, and the enticing smells of sizzling street food. You're eyeing a tempting honey-glazed fig, or maybe a piping hot slice of stuffed bread, when, predictably, the urgent need for relief strikes again, because of course it does. And now, surrounded by traders, shoppers, and pickpockets eyeing your purse. You have to locate one of Rome's market toilets, a whole different beast from the grand foricae or the Colosseum's utilitarian facilities. These market latrines, compact, crowded, sometimes hastily constructed to accommodate the flood of people who surge through these areas daily. You spot one wedged between two stalls, its entrance partly obscured by hanging bolts of cloth. Inside, the scene is both familiar and somehow grimmer. The same stone bench with holes. But this time the space is tighter, the smell sharper, the sense of urgency more palpable. After all, in a market, time is money. No one lingers longer than necessary. You squeeze in, jostling with a fishmonger still wiping scales from his hands, a delivery boy balancing a basket of olives, and a woman scolding her son for poking at the sponge stick like it's a toy. There's no marble elegance here, just rough stone, hastily carved. And water channels that sometimes work and sometimes don't. The drainage system beneath your feet gurgles half-heartedly. But judging by the aroma, it's seen better days. Historians still argue whether these smaller market latrines connected directly to the main sewer lines or relied on cesspits that had to be cleaned out manually by workers you would not envy. And speaking of envy, take a look at the vendors who've set up near the toilet entrance. Some clever soul has positioned a wine cart close enough to tempt weary shoppers and provide a quick drink to wash away the taste of market dust store. Perhaps to fortify you against the toilet's interior? Others might offer sprigs of herbs, or little sachets of fragrant resin, not out of generosity, but at a neat little markup, knowing full well what you're about to face. It's supply and demand, Roman style. Inside, there's barely room to move. The sponge sticks float in a trough that's seen too many uses already, and you notice with a sinking feeling that the rinse bucket is low on water. Someone likely a slave or unlucky apprentices tasked with refilling it. But right now, they're nowhere in sight. You weigh your options, wait for a refill, or brave the sponge as is. Neither seems particularly appealing as you settle onto the stone. Doing your best to avoid contact with anything unnecessary, you can't help but overhear the chatter around you. A trader boasts about swindling a rival out of a shipment of dates. A woman complains loudly about the price of grain. A young man whispers sweet nothings to a girl he's cornered near the doorway, oblivious to the less than romantic setting. In Rome, it seems even the toilet is a place for business, argument, and occasionally courtship. The din is almost comforting, drowning out the more unpleasant sounds echoing from beneath. You notice graffiti scratched into the soft stone of the wall's rude drawings. Of course, but also surprisingly witty comments about local politicians, merchants, or rival traders. Lupus sells watered wine, one scrawl proclaims, while another advises, never trust a baker with clean hands. These little snapshots of Roman life offer a kind of democratic voice, a chance for the ordinary citizen to speak out, even if only to the next visitor desperate enough to squat here. And yes, some historians still debate whether certain graffiti served as genuine political commentary or was just the ancient equivalent of bathroom humor. Either way, it gives you something to read while you wait for the sponge bucket to be refilled. If you dare wait that long, the space is stifling.
Oh.
The air heavy with the mingled smells of humanity, cooking fires, and whatever unfortunate cargo the drainage system has failed to carry away. Yet, somehow, life in the market bustles on outside. You can hear the calls of hawkers, the creak of cartwheels, the distant clang of a smith at his forge. Here in this cramped little latrine, you're part of the beating heart of the city, the messy, noisy, necessary side of Roman urban life. And just as you finish up and attempt the least, a traumatic possible encounter with the communal sponge, the refill boy finally arrives, sloshing a fresh bucket of vinegar water with a resigned look that suggests this is far from the worst part of his day. You nod your thanks, leave the sponge to its next user, and step back into the light, blinking at the sun and the swirl of color and sound that is the Roman marketplace. Somewhere, a street musician strikes up a jaunty tune, and you promise yourself a strong cup of wine before you attempt this particular market adventure again. You wander away from the noise of the market, seeking quieter streets. But Rome doesn't really do quiet. There's always a hum-the-clip-clop of hooves on stone, the chatter of passers-by, the splash of water from fountains and aqueduct spouts. And beneath it all, a hidden world is at work, the great Roman sewers, tirelessly swallowing the waste of over 1 million souls. Tonight, let's follow your curiosity and perhaps your morbid fascination down into this unseen underworld. Cloaca Maxima. You spot one of its grated openings near the edge of a forum square. The air rising from it is damp, earthy, with a distinct undertone that reminds you why the Romans built this marvel in the first place. The Cloaca Maxima, literally. The greatest sewer wasn't just a ditch. It was an engineering wonder. It's a massive stone tunnel that carried stormwater and waste out of the city and into the Tiber River. You edge closer, peering through the grate, and imagine the dark, echoing space below, where centuries of refuse have passed along on their final journey. Let's be honest, it's not the most glamorous feature of Rome. But without it, the city couldn't have functioned. Built originally around the 6th century BC, though historians still argue whether the credit goes to Tarquinius Priscus, the legendary Etruscan king, or to some later Roman genius, the Cloaca Maxima began as an open canal and gradually became enclosed in stone, part of a vast and intricate drainage system. It connected with the smaller sewers beneath homes, baths, and yes, latrines, forming a network that kept the city from drowning in its own filth, or at least that was the idea. You imagine yourself slipping through one of the maintenance hatches, down into the sewer's cool gloom, the ceiling arches high overhead lined with smooth, worn stones. Water rushes along the floor in a steady stream, carrying with it the detritus of Roman life, bits of food, animal bones, broken pottery, and, of course, human waste. The smell down here? Surprisingly bearable, thanks to the constant flow of water. The Romans knew that stagnation was the enemy. Their sewer was designed to keep things moving. Still, it wasn't a place you'd want to linger. The darknesses, near total, broken only by the occasional flicker of torchlight when sewer workers venture in for inspections or repairs. And those workers braver than most. Let's be clear, risked more than just the stench. The tunnels could collapse, especially in the rainy season when the water rose and turned the passages into dangerous torrents. There were even rumors, whispered among the superstitious, of strange creatures lurking down here, snakes, giant rats, or worse. Historians still debate how much truth there is to these tales, but given what floated through the Cloaca Maxima, you can forgive the imagination for running wild. What's fascinating is how much pride the Romans took in this subterranean artery. Writers like Pliny the Elder and Strabo raved about its size and strength, marveling that it had lasted centuries without failing. They loved to point out that, during heavy storms, the sewer could carry away entire tree trunks or dead animals, washed into the streets. It was, in their eyes, a symbol of Rome's mastery over nature, a monument, as grand as any temple or triumphal arch. Even if it was hidden from sight, you edge along an imagined walkway down here, the rush of water at your side, and think about what the Cloaca Maxima meant to everyday Romans. It wasn't just about sanitation. It was about the power of engineering to tame the forces of the natural world. And, in a way, it was about democracy too. The same sewer carried the waste of the poorest tenement dweller and the richest senator. Down here, all Romans were equals, another contributor to the city's endless river of refuse. There's a curious irony to it all. The sewers kept the streets cleaner than many future European capitals would manage, but they also carried waste directly into the Tiber, polluting the river that supplied drinking water to many parts of the city. Some scholars suggest this contributed to periodic outbreaks of disease, though others argue the constant flow diluted the filth enough to keep major epidemics at bay. The debate continues, like so many things about ancient Rome, and let's not forget the Cloaca Maxima wasn't just about waste. Its tunnels became hiding places during times of crisis, refuges for criminals, rebels, or those fleeing capture. There are tales of escaped slaves vanishing into the sewer system, emerging days later on the city's outskirts. Was it true, or just a story to thrill nervous citizens? Historians still argue the point, but the idea of Rome's underworld as both lifeline and lair lingers in the imagination. You climb back up. Blinking in the sunlight, the sound of rushing water now just a memory beneath your feet. The Cloaca Maxima carries on, unseen but essential. A reminder that even the most dazzling civilization depends on what lies beneath. Your feet carry you beyond the city walls now, along one of Rome's famed roads, perhaps the Appian Way. That ancient superhighway lined with tombs and villas, stretching out toward distant provinces. The countryside opens up before you. Fields, dotted with olive trees, vineyards heavy with grapes, and the occasional dusty outpost where weary travelers rest their heads. More importantly, for our purposes tonight, relieve themselves. Because if you thought finding a decent toilet in Rome was tricky, imagine being miles from the city, stomach grumbling from a roadside meal, and no familiar latrine in sight. Picture this. You approach a roadside inn, the kind that caters to merchants, messengers, and legionaries on leave. The building is simple, sturdy, with a red-tiled roof and smoke curling from the kitchen chimney. Inside, the innkeeper greets you with a nod, points to a corner where travelers take their meals, and gestures vaguely when you inquire about necessities. There's no grand foricae here, no marble bench or decorative mosaic. Instead, you're directed around the back, where a small outhouse stands near the stables, its wooden door hanging slightly askew. This rustic facility might be little more than a pit dug into the earth, lined with stones if you're lucky. A plank across the top serves as a seat of sorts, the wood worn smooth by countless weary posteriors. A bucket of water, maybe even a hint of vinegar in it, sits nearby, along with a humble sponge, unistic because even out here in the provinces, some Roman customs are hard to shake. The smell? Let's just say the countryside air does little to mask it, and the flies, they've claimed this outhouse as their personal kingdom. Historians still argue whether these roadside facilities were standardized in any meaningful way or cobbled together by each innkeeper according to means and mood. Evidence is scarce. The wooden structures rarely survived the centuries, leaving archaeologists with little more than post holes and scattered debris to piece together their stories. But one thing's certain, the experience was far from luxurious. You step inside door, as inside as one can get with gaps in the walls wide enough to glimpse the fields beyond. Do your best to settle in. The rough wood creaks ominously beneath you, and you can't help but glance down, wary of splinters, or worse. At least, there's fresh straw scattered on the floor, a small mercy to absorb the inevitable spills and drips. And perhaps the innkeeper's son has been tasked with keeping the bucket filled, though judging by its current state, he's overdue. Outside, you hear the lowing of oxen, the clatter of a passing cart, the occasional burst of laughter from other travelers. The outhouse, while humble, offers a moment of solitude on the bustling road. You might even spot a small charm or carving tucked into the wooden frame, a token left by a superstitious traveler hoping to ward off bad luck. After all, the countryside could be dangerous, and no one wanted to anger the spirits by being careless, even during such a mundane task. And speaking of spirits, it's worth noting that some Romans believed roadside latrines were haunted places. Prime real estate for mischievous or malevolent entities. There are records of amulets left behind, small offerings to keep the unseen at bay. Were these just nervous habits, or reflections of genuine belief? Scholars still debate the extent to which fear of the supernatural shaped daily Roman habits, but you can't help but feel a little uneasy. Alone in this creaky outhouse, with only the rustling of the wind and the olive trees for company, when you're done, you step out into the sun, grateful for the warmth and light. You dust off your tunic, take a deep breath of cleaner air, and perhaps wash your hands at the trough by the stable assuming. The water is fresh and not commandeered by a thirsty mule. The innkeeper gives you a knowing look. After all, every traveler faces this reality on the road. And as you continue your journey along the Appian Way, you find yourself eyeing the horizon, already wondering where the next outhouse might be and whether it could possibly be any better. Your journey takes you farther afield now, beyond inns and villas, until the gleam of Roman armor catches your eye. A legion encampment sprawls across a rise-orderly rows of tents, banners snapping in the breeze, and the steady clink of metal. As soldiers sharpen blades or tend to their gear, the discipline of Rome on full display. But amid all this precision and strength, you might wonder, where did these men go when nature called? After all, even the most fearsome legionary couldn't fight off the inevitable. You're escorted past the palisades, boots crunching on the packed earth of the castra. The scent of wood smoke mingles with leather, sweat, and the sharp temps of oil. And off at the edge of camp, beyond the cook fires and training grounds, you spot them, the camp latrines, functional, unadorned, and absolutely essential. Here the engineering genius of Rome applied itself to the most basic of problems with typical thoroughness. Picture a long trench dug into the ground, sometimes lined with wooden planks, sometimes simply cut into the soil, depending on how permanent the camp was. Over the trench, a plank with holes cut at regular intervals. No fancy marble seats here, just the bare minimum needed to keep order. A ditch ran alongside, filled with water from a nearby stream, or carried in by soldiers on latrine duty, designed to help wash waste away. You glance at the setup and appreciate the practicality. Easy to dig, easy to cover up when the camp moved, and placed far enough from the tents to limit the worst smells. But close enough for convenience during a chilly night, and yes, the sponge unistick was part of the setup, resting in a bucket of brine or vinegar. In fact, soldiers often had to make do with whatever was at hand: rag, moss, a handful of grass, if supplies ran low. Some carried personal sponges or cloths, tucked into their packs alongside dice and amulets. Because if you're marching across Gaul or trudging through Germania, you learn fast that it pays to be prepared. Historians still argue whether legionaries had formal schedules for latrine cleaning, or if it was assigned as nida, punishment for misbehavior, or simply part of the rotating camp duties. What we do know is that cleanliness was drilled into Roman military life. A dirty camp was a dangerous camp, prone to disease. And so these trenches were dug with care, maintained daily, and filled in completely when the legion broke camp. Discipline that built roads and aqueducts also kept the latrines functional. You lower yourself onto the plank, feeling the rough wood beneath you, and glance at the horizon. The sun sets behind the hills, casting long shadows across the camp. Somewhere, a centurion barks an order. Cook stirs a pot of lentils. And here you are, part of the great machine that is the Roman army, participating in its less glorious but utterly vital routines. And let's not forget the strategic element. A well-placed latrine trench could serve double duty, waste disposal, and a line of defense. Some camp designs positioned the trenches in such a way that if the enemy approached from a certain direction, they'd find themselves facing a ditch both unpleasant and impassable. No one wants to charge through that. It's one of those little details that reminds you how the Romans thought of everything, of course. The camp wasn't free from hazards. Snakes, scorpions, biting insects, attracted by the smell and dampness of the latrine trenches. There are accounts, though scholars debate their accuracy, of soldiers suffering nasty surprises during midnight visits. You keep a wary eye on the ground, just in case. And while you sit, you overhear the usual camp banter. A pair of legionaries grumble about their rations. Another boasts about a lucky throw of the dice. A group nearby argues over the finer points of a gladiator match they'd seen on leave. The latrine may not be glamorous, but it's another place where the bonds of the legion are forged. Shared hardship, shared humor, shared humanity. You finish your business, rinse your hands at the water channel, and stand.
Oh.
The night air is cool now, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby woods. As you return to your tent, you glance back at the trench, grateful in a strange way. Because in the Roman army, even the toilet reflected the order, discipline, and practicality that built an empire. You wake to the soft light of dawn, the camp behind you now as your wanderings lead toward one of Rome's most beloved pastimes, the public baths. Steam rises ahead, mingling with the scents of olive oil and warm stone as you approach the grand, complex a temple not just to cleanliness, but to leisure, gossip, and social life. But even in this oasis of marble and water, nature has a way of asserting itself. And tonight, we'll slip quietly through the tepidarium and caldarium to explore how the Romans handled bathroom breaks in their bathhouses. You pass through the arched entryway, greeted by attendants who offer you a strigil and a small bottle of scented oil. The air inside is thick with humidity, carrying the temps of minerals from the heated pools. Voices echo in the vast space, merchants sealing deals, poets reciting a few lines to admirers, matrons comparing jewelry, young men boasting of athletic feats. But as you move deeper into the complex, you begin to wonder, amid all the splendor, where do bathers go when the call of nature comes mid-soak? The answer lies tucked discreetly near the outer edges of the bathhouse, behind cleverly placed partitions or small side chambers, modest latrines designed to serve the hundreds who visited each day. These weren't afterthoughts, they were essential parts of the design. It's positioned to keep the baths themselves pristine while managing the less glamorous side of Roman relaxation. You slip into one of these latrine areas. The walls are simple plaster or brick, sometimes decorated with a humble mosaic, or painted seen a dolphin perhaps, or a god of the sea, as if to remind you that water, in all its forms, was sacred here. The benches are stone with those familiar keyhole openings, and beneath your feet, water flows steadily, sweeping waste toward the sewers. And yes, of course, there's a row of sponge sticks resting in vinegar or saltwater troughs, their worn handles testament to the many bathers who've come before you. What's remarkable is how seamlessly these facilities fit into the life of the bath. There's no fuss, no shame. A bather might step out of the caldarium, still glistening with sweat, take care of business, and return to the frigidarium for a brisk dip without missing a beat. In fact, some scholars suggest that part of the reason baths were so popular was this convenience, a place to clean yourself inside and out, all in one visit. Whether the baths were primarily for hygiene, health, or socializing is still debated by historians. But there's no doubt that their design reflected a deep understanding of human needs. You lower yourself onto the bench. The stone pleasantly warm from the sun streaming through a high window. The murmur of voices and splashing water filters through the partition, creating a strangely soothing backdrop. You spot a small offering, perhaps, a sprig of laurel or a bit of incense ash, left in a niche by a pious bather hoping for the gods' favor. Even here, in the most practical of moments, the Romans wove ritual and superstition into their routines. And here's a curious detail. Some bathhouses offered perfumed water for washing after use, or at least had attendants tasked with ensuring the sponge bucket stayed fresh. You might even find a small brazier burning herbs near the doorway. An attempt heroic, if not always successful, to keep the air sweet. The baths were about pleasure, after all, and no one wanted a foul odor spoiling the experience. Of course, with so many people passing through daily, the bath latrines saw their share of mishaps. There are reports, half rumor, half warning, of patrons who slipped on wet stone, or of pickpockets who lurked near the toilets, waiting for an unwary bather to set down their purse. And then there were the inevitable debates about cleanliness. Some claimed that the sponge water at the baths was fresher, replaced more often thanks to the high turnover. Others grumbled that the sheer number of users made it a breeding ground for illness. Scholars still argue which view is closer to the truth, though the baths remained wildly popular either way, as you rise and wash your hands at a nearby basin. You catch a glimpse of the main pool beyond, bodies glistening in the afternoon sun, laughter ringing out over the water. The baths were the great equalizer of Roman society. Editors, merchants, freedmen, all sharing the same pools, the same benches, the same sponge sticks. You leave the latrine behind, refreshed in more ways than one, ready to rejoin the flow of bathhouse life. You emerge from the steamy bathhouse, skin tingling from the sudden coolness of the afternoon breeze. The city hums around you, but your path leads now toward the quieter courtyards and shaded gardens of a Roman domus, where the rhythm of family life unfolds. And with family life comes one universal challenge: raising children, including the tricky business of toilet training in a world of sponges, chamber pots, and public latrines. You step into a villa's atrium, the floor gleaming with intricate mosaics. A toddler waddles by, giggling as he clutches a wooden toy, his mother close behind, keeping a watchful eye. And not far off, you spot a small, unassuming object tucked into the corner of the peristyle, a child-sized chamber pot, carved from clay or perhaps fashioned from bronze for wealthier households, because, as you might guess, Romans didn't expect their youngest citizens to brave the public foricae right away. Instead, the potty training started at home. Imagine a Roman mother and nursemaid patiently guiding a squirming toddler toward that little pot, murmuring encouragement while keeping a firm hand on any wandering limbs. No diapers in the modern sense-cloth wrappings, perhaps for the very youngest, but toilet independence was the goal from an early age. A household slave might be tasked with emptying and cleaning the pot, carrying the contents discreetly to a corner of the garden or down to the latrine connected to the house's sewer line. Historians still argue how common indoor connections were in ordinary homes. But for the well-off, convenience was key. You watch as a slightly older child, perhaps 5 or 6, is gently reminded to use the family's private latrine. This small chamber looks much like the one you saw in the villa earlier, a plain stone or wooden seat. Water flowing beneath if the household had invested in plumbing. And yes, even here, there's a miniature version of the trusty sponge stick, smaller hands needing smaller tools. The child hesitates, eyes the sponge with deep suspicion, and you can't blame him. Sharing a communal sponge is one thing. Using one after your siblings? It's a challenge of its own. Teaching toilet manners wasn't just about cleanliness. Roman parents emphasized modesty and respect, even during such personal tasks. A child who neglected to wash afterward or left a mess behind might earn a sharp rebuke, not just for the inconvenience, but because such carelessness was thought to invite bad luck or the displeasure of the household gods. Small charms or painted symbols sometimes adorned the latrine, watching over even these humblest of duties. Whether these symbols offered genuine comfort or served mainly as reminders, historians still debate, but they certainly added character to an otherwise utilitarian space. And let's not forget the awkward teenage years. Imagine a gangly adolescent trying to navigate the etiquette of the public latrine, learning when to make small talk, when to keep your head down, and how to avoid the dreaded rookie mistake, grabbing the wrong sponge or knocking over the rinse bucket. You can picture the older brother teasing, the younger sister smirking behind her hand, and the harried parent trying to restore order while managing their own sponge-related anxieties. Toilet training, it seems, was as much about social learning as sanitation. In the busy streets beyond the villa, poorer families without private facilities faced different challenges. Small children might be encouraged to use chamber pots at home, or, if they were old enough, led to the nearest public latrine, where a parent kept a protective arm around them amid the crowd. And yes, accidents happened. Rome's streets bore witness to the occasional unplanned incident, and the city's ever-present stream of slaves and workers often found themselves cleaning up after the youngest citizens. It was all part of the great, messy, living tapestry of the city. You take one last look at the quiet garden, where the mother has finally coaxed her little one onto the chamber pot, and the nursemaid exchanges a relieved glance with her mistress. The business of raising Roman children was no easy task, and toilet training was just one more challenge handled with a mix of patience, practicality, and perhaps the occasional silent prayer to whatever deity governed such delicate matters. Your stroll through the villa gardens takes you back out into the city's winding lanes, where shrines dot corners and household altars peek from behind doorways. Rome, after all, was a city where gods watched over every part of life, and, yes, that included your most private moments in the toilet. Tonight, you'll pause in the doorway of a modest foricae, or glance into a villa's latrine and notice small offerings left on ledges, faint traces of incense, or painted symbols on the walls. Because in the Roman mind, even the loo was no place. To offend the divine, you ease onto a familiar stone bench inside a public latrine and find yourself eye to eye with a small carved figure tucked into a niche, a protective deity, perhaps meant to ward off misfortune. Some latrines bore the image of Fortuna, goddess of luck, or even Mercury, the swift-footed messenger who could, in theory, help ensure your visit was quick and uneventful. And in darker corners, graffiti invoking the favor of obscure spirits, or rustic gods, anything to guard against the dangers that lurked where waste and shadow met. Historians still argue whether these toilet gods were truly worshipped or simply part of Rome's broader habit of covering all bases, just in case. But the superstitions didn't stop at statues. Romans were wary of malevolent forces that might lurk in latrine, spirits of the dead, mischievous shades, or even demons thought to dwell in damp, dark places. There are records of amulets hung near toilet entrances, or charms worn beneath tunics to protect against evil while in such a vulnerable position. And yes, certain phrases were muttered as protection, half prayer, half magical incantation. Whether these practices sprang from genuine fear or were simply inherited traditions, scholars still debate. Even the sewer system itself carried a touch of the mystical. The cloaca maxima wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was tied in the Roman mind to purification, to the idea of carrying away what was impure and dangerous. There are accounts of small offerings tossed into the sewers as thanks or appeasement, part of rituals meant to keep the city's hidden arteries safe and functioning. You can almost imagine a harried merchant pausing at the latrine's edge, murmuring a quick thanks to the spirits below before hurrying on with his day. In private homes, the connection between toilet habits and religion could be even more intimate. A household might dedicate a small shrine near the latrine to the lares or pinatis, those ever-watchful protectors of hearth and home. Some families painted symbols of good luck near the toilet seat itself, a horseshoe, perhaps, or a palm branch, And while it might seem amusing, you have to admire the logic. If misfortune could strike at any moment, why not take precautions wherever you sat? You glanced down at the sponge stick, resting innocently in its bucket. Even this humble tool was. Touched by superstition, some believed that using a sponge improperly, rushing the rinse, dropping it carelessly, could invite illness or bad luck. A careful hand, a respectful attitude, even in this small task, was seen as a sign of good character. And let's not forget the festivals. Certain Roman holidays focused on cleansing and purification, moments when the city itself was symbolically scrubbed clean, and the sewers played their part in carrying away the city's collective impurities. During these times, latrines and sewer grates might be decorated with fresh garlands or sprinkled with wine or oil, small gestures to honor the system that kept the city healthy and perhaps to placate the spirits thought to dwell within. You finish your visit and step back into the sunlight, the murmur of prayers and the flicker of shrine candles lingering in your memory. The Roman toilet wasn't just a place of physical relief, it was a place where the mortal, the practical, and the divine all met in one simple, necessary act. And in that, perhaps, there's a lesson in humility for us all. You leave behind the shrine-dotted foricae and wind your way through narrow alleys toward a part of town where life feels just a bit more complicated for half the population, because tonight, you're about to experience the world of Roman women and their relationship with the city's toilets. The bustling latrines, the shared sponge sticks, the open design, all of this presents unique challenges for the ladies of Rome, who must navigate modesty, safety, and social norms in a city that wasn't exactly designed with their comfort. In mind, you find yourself at the edge of a crowded bathhouse complex, or perhaps a busy forum latrine. The entrance yawns wide, no separate facilities marked out for women, no signs indicating who should go where. Inside, the usual rows of stone. Seats await, exposed as always to the gaze of your fellow citizens. And that's the first problem. Privacy. For Roman women, using a public toilet meant weighing convenience against the risk of embarrassment, harassment, or worse. Wealthier women might have avoided public latrines altogether, preferring chamber pots at home or the relative seclusion of a private villa's facilities, but for working women, market traders, slaves, or those on long errands, the public latrine was sometimes the only option. You slip inside, keeping your head down, hoping the crowd is too preoccupied with their own business to pay you much mind. Maybe you've brought along a trusted servant or an older female relative, someone to stand guard, to help ensure a bit of space in the otherwise communal chaos. Historians still argue whether certain latrines were informally designated for women or if usage was entirely mixed, left to the customs of each neighborhood. But the layout rarely offered much in the way of dignity. Once seated, you might find yourself the subject of unwanted attention. There are writings half complaint, half bitter humor from Roman women about the hazards of using the city's shared facilities. Leering glances, crude comments, or the occasional bold suitor attempting to strike up a conversation at precisely the wrong moment. And with no doors or partitions to hide behind, the best defense was often speed and a well-practiced glare. You can almost hear the muttered curses, the sharp-tongued retorts as women carved out what privacy they could in the public space. The sponge stick, ever present, offered its own challenges. Sharing a cleaning tool with strangers was bad enough. Sharing it with men who might not have the most fastidious habits, it took Roman resilience. It's no wonder that wealthier women often carried their own sponges or cloths, tucked discreetly, into a pouch or basket ready to be used and washed at home. And for those with servants, there was the added advantage of assistance. A slave could clean the area before use, ensure the sponge water was fresh, or even act as a human shield against prying eyes. And yet for all these challenges, Roman women made do. You can picture a group of matrons entering the latrine together, their conversation never pausing as they settled onto the benches, perhaps even finding a strange kind of solidarity in the shared discomfort. After all, Roman society was nothing if not practical, and necessity often trumped propriety. In private homes, the situation was easier. A lady of the house might have her own small latrine near her quarters, or at least a chamber pot kept in a corner tended by a personal maid. These arrangements offered a measure of seclusion, but even here, the boundaries between public and private could blur. A visitor might need to borrow the facilities, or servants might share the space out. Of practicality, there's evidence of elaborate toilet rooms in some villas, complete with decorative frescoes and shelves for perfumes or oils, suggesting that even these moments of vulnerability could be wrapped in a veneer of elegance. And of course, the superstitions we explored earlier touched women's toilet habits too. A Roman woman might murmur a quick prayer to a household spirit before sitting, or wear a protective charm against ill luck or wandering spirits. Some scholars believe women were even more likely than men to observe these rituals, given the double vulnerability of their position in society and in the latrine. But whether these customs sprang from genuine fear, or were just part of Rome's ever-present web of tradition, well, the debate continues. You rise, adjust your tunic, and step back into the sunlight, grateful for the breeze and the hum of daily life that drowns out the memory of the cramped, awkward space behind you. Rome may have been a city of grand ideals and mighty monuments, but when it came to the daily realities of its women, even something as simple as a toilet break could be an exercise in courage and ingenuity. Leaving the latrines behind, you meander through the lively streets of Rome. Draw now toward the more mischievous side of Roman toilet culture, the graffiti and jokes scrawled across the walls of the empire's loose. Because if there's one thing that transcends time and culture, it's humanity's irrepressible urge to leave behind a cheeky doodle or a witty one-liner. Where no one expects it, especially in the bathroom, you step inside a well-worn public foricae, the stone benches, smooth from generations of use. And what do your eyes meet as you glance at the plaster walls, at the columns framing the space, at the underside of the stone seat? Because yes, even there, graffiti, ancient, irreverent, often crude, but sometimes startlingly clever. A doodle of a gladiator with exaggerated features, sword in one hand, sponge stick in the other, as if mid-battle against the forces of nature. A scrawl that reads, "Cacavi ite gudeo, I crapped, and I rejoice." Because why not celebrate a job well done? It's here, seated among strangers, that Romans felt free to voice opinions they might never dare speak aloud in the forum. A scribbled insult aimed at a local official. Lucius owes taxes, but spends on wine. A playful jab at a rival baker. Don't trust bread from Flavius sits as stale as his jokes. And yes, the occasional love note. "Julia, I saw you here yesterday. Your beauty outshone the filth." Historians still argue whether some of these inscriptions were genuine expressions or simply bathroom humor meant to pass the time. As you shift on the bench, you notice how the graffiti layers itself folder, carvings half obscured by newer ones. A palimpsest of Rome's bathroom banter. There's a strange intimacy in reading these lines, knowing that someone centuries ago felt the same impatience or boredom, same impulse to leave a mark in an otherwise unremarkable spot. Some of the drawings are surprisingly elaborate. Ship battling waves, perhaps the artist's fantasy of escape from the city's noise and smell. A detailed depiction of a chariot, its driver grinning with the triumph of a man who beat the queue to the toilet. And then the inevitable. A few anatomical sketches drawn with the same gleeful irreverence found on bathroom stalls today. Can almost hear the snicker of the person who carved them. Hidden from sight by the noise and distraction of a crowded latrine, and it wasn't just the public loose. In private villas, archaeologists have found casual graffiti near toilets and bath areas, 2 scribbled names. Prayers for good luck, or the occasional dirty joke. Tucked away in corners where only the most observant servant or guest might spot them. It's a reminder that humor and humanity thrived even in the smallest, least glamorous spaces. There's one scratched phrase that seems to sum it all up. Omnes eodem cogimur. We are all driven to the same place, whether meant philosophically, or just as a wry comment on the realities of Roman sanitation. It's hard not to nod in agreement. Rich or poor, free or slave, senator or street seller, everyone ended up here sooner or later. Shoulder to shoulder, sponge stick in hand, leaving behind their mark in more ways than one. As you rise to go, you trace your fingers over one last bit of graffiti, A simple heart, carved beside a name. It's no insult, no joke, just a quiet message that someone, once upon a time, thought of love, even in the most unlikely of places. You step back into the sun, smiling at the thought that maybe, just maybe, the next visitor will pause and smile too. You leave behind the witty scrawls of the public latrine and find yourself drawn toward the arteries that made it all possible. The pipes and plumbing that hummed beneath the skin of Rome like hidden veins. The city's lifeblood wasn't just its people or its roads. It was the water that flowed through its aqueducts and sewers, the lead pipes that snaked beneath homes, temples, and baths, keeping waste moving and civilization cleaner at least, cleaner than it might have been without. Them, you kneel beside an exposed section of pipe near a construction site where workers have broken open the street to repair a drainage channel. The pipe gleams dully in the sun, thick with the patina of centuries. Lead. The Romans called it plumbum, and they used it liberally lining baths. It's carrying fresh water into fountains and channeling waste out of latrines and kitchens. Ingenious, durable, and let's face it, possibly a bit dangerous. Historians still argue about how much Rome's love affair with lead contributed to health problems among its citizens. Was the empire slowly poisoning itself through its pipes? The debate flows on as endlessly as the water itself. You run your hand along the smooth, heavy material, imagining the countless gallons that have surged through it over the decades. The network is astonishing. Aqueducts bringing water from distant hills, distributing it through branching pipes into public fountains, baths, and yes, even private homes of the wealthy. Wastewater and sewage, in turn, were funneled through terracotta and lead conduits into the great sewers, like the Cloaca Maxima, ensuring that at least most of the city's refuse was carried away before it could pile up in the streets. In the corner of your mind, you can almost hear the clink of tools as plumbers plumbery-patched leaks, hammered joints tight, and cursed under their breath at the quirks of the ancient system. These men were as vital to the city's functioning as any senator or general. Even if their work earned them little glory, no job came without its hazards. Exposure to lead dust, cramped spaces, sudden floods, when a pipe burst, all in a day's labor for the men who kept Rome's water flowing. You follow the line? Of piping visually, imagining it weaving beneath the city's grand forums and noisy marketplaces. Under taverns and tenements, the system wasn't perfect. Pipes leaked, joints failed. The water pressure dropped when aqueducts cracked or were sabotaged during times of unrest. And in the poorer quarters, access to fresh water wasn't always guaranteed, no matter how impressive the infrastructure. Still, for its time, Rome's plumbing was unparalleled, a marvel that visitors from less advanced lands gaped at in wonder. And what of the waste it carried? The water that flushed through latrines and carried away the city's less glamorous output didn't just vanish. It spilled into the Tiber, turning the river into both a source of life and, occasionally, a stinking hazard. Fishers cast their nets upriver away from the outflows, while washerwomen sought cleaner eddies. The city's relationship with its river was as complicated as its relationship with its plumbing, both vital and risky. In equal measure, you pause by a fountain where clear water still bubbles up, fed by the ancient lines. A child cups his hands to drink, and an old man rinses a piece of fruit, oblivious to the centuries of engineering that makes such small acts possible. And you can't help but wonder, was the lead a slow poison, or was it Rome's hubris? Its endless expansion that truly brought the empire to its knees? Scholars still debate their arguments as tangled as the city's pipes. You step back, leaving the exposed plumbing to the workers who mutter as they patch and seal, doing as their ancestors did, keeping the water flowing, the wastes moving, and the heart of the city beating strong. As you wander further from the cracked open pipes and gurgling fountains, your path draws you into the shadows of Rome's unseen workforce, the silent, tireless figures who kept the city's latrines, baths, and sewers running, the toilet slaves, and attendants. These were the men and sometimes women whose daily labor made possible the comfort, if one can call it that, of thousands. Though their work was as thankless as it was essential. You imagine stepping into a public foricae at dawn before the day's crowds arrive. The stone seats are cold, the air damp, the scent of vinegar and brine mingling with the faint ammonia temps that never quite leaves such spaces, and they're moving quietly between the benches, is an attendant, perhaps a slave assigned to this duty as punishment, or a low-ranking worker earning a few sesterces a week. He empties buckets, rinses the sponge sticks, and wipes down the seats with a cloth that's seen better days. His eyes are dull with the routine of it, his hands cracked from the harsh cleaning agents. Historians still argue about the precise status of these attendants. Were they city employees, private contractors, household slaves assigned the least desirable task? The truth, as usual, likely varied across time and place. But one thing is certain. Without them, the foricae would have become unbearable even faster than they already did. Someone had to keep the rinse water topped up, sweep out the debris, and shoo away stray animals drawn by the smell. And it wasn't just the public toilets. In private homes, wealthy families might assign a slave specifically to manage the chamber pots, the small household latrine, or even to assist their masters during these delicate moments. You picture a well-appointed villa where the lady of the house retires to her private lavatory and a discreet maid waits outside, ready with a fresh sponge, a cloth, or a vial of scented oil to mask unpleasant odors. An awkward duty, to say the least, but in a society built on hierarchy and service. These small indignities were part of daily life. You pause at the edge of a bathhouse latrine, watching as an attendant pours fresh vinegar into the sponge bucket. His movements practiced, efficient. He glances up briefly, his expression unreadable, before returning to his work. You wonder what stories he could tell, overheard secrets of careless patrons leaving purses behind, of quarrels that spilled from the bath into the toilet, perhaps of the small kindnesses that came his way. A coin dropped into his hand. A kind word offered on a quiet morning. Of course, not all patrons were generous. There are tales half warning, half lament of attendants berated for failing to keep up with the endless tide of waste, of slaves punished for the unavoidable smells, of workers blamed for the faults of a system stretched to its limits. Let's not forget the dangers. A sudden flood from a blocked pipe, a bite from a rat or a snake lurking in the shadows, a fall on slick stone, unseen by any who might help. The toilet attendant's lot was not an easy one. You move on, your sandals clicking against the worn paving stones. But the image lingers, the quiet, unglamorous figures who bore the brunt of Rome's waste management, invisible yet indispensable. And as you pass a group of well-dressed citizens gossiping on a street corner, you can't help but reflect that every polished marble bench, every fragrant bath, every neat latrine depended on hands few cared to acknowledge. Their work kept Rome clean enough to function, their labor washed away as surely as the waste they managed. And in that, perhaps lies the truest measure of their value, seen only in what they prevented, heard only in the silence that followed their tireless efforts. Your path now drifts toward the river, where the smell of tar, wet rope, and salt mingles with the murmur of boatmen and the creak of oars. The bustling port is alive with movement crates hoisted, orders shouted, gulls crying overhead. Anchored among the merchant ships and fishing boats lies a Roman galley, its deck slick with spray, its crew lean and sun-browned. Tonight, you'll step aboard and discover what answering nature's call looked like when you were at sea, far from the conveniences or inconveniences of the city's latrines. The ship rocks gently as you climb aboard, boots thudding on the wooden planks. The air smells of brine, pitch, and sweat, and beneath it all, that subtle, sour note of waste, because even the sea breeze can't entirely mask the realities of shipboard life. Ack! You glance along the deck, past coiled ropes, and the rhythmic rise and fall of oars, searching for the latrine. There's no neat row of stone seats here, no clever plumbing or sponge troughs. Instead, you spot them at the bow and stern, simple wooden beams jutting over the water. With a hole cut in the middle, a makeshift toilet open to the elements, where sailors and passengers alike do what they must, you edge toward one of these. See toilets gripping the railing as the ship lurches slightly. The breeze is strong here, whipping at your tunic, the waves below churning and frothing against the hull.
Yeah.
And as you lower yourself onto the beam, you suddenly understand the precariousness of it all. No privacy, no stability, just you, the wind, and the endless sea. One wrong move, one unexpected wave, and you might find yourself in the drink. With worse things than salt water soaking your sandals, historians still debate the exact design of these shipboard latrines, whether they were standard on all vessels or improvised depending on the size and wealth of the ship owner. But the concept is clear enough. A hole over the water, as far from the main deck as practical, where waste could drop directly into the waves. Efficient, if not particularly dignified, and in stormy weather, let's just say many a Roman sailor likely considered the chamber pot a safer option, even if it meant waiting until the ship reached calmer seas or port. You sit there, swaying with the rhythm of the ship, and imagine the life of the crew. Their days filled with labor, hauling ropes, scrubbing decks, tending to the sails. Their nights spent, wrapped in cloaks against the cold, lulled by the creak of timbers and the slap of waves. And always when nature called, the same balancing. Act feet braced, hands gripping tight, hoping for steady footing and a quick, uneventful visit. And what of the officers, the wealthier passengers? They might have a chamber pot kept in their cabin, tended by a servant, emptied discreetly over the side. Small luxury. But one that didn't entirely spare them from the ship's smells or the awkwardness of managing waste on the move. No. Matter your status, the sea was the great equalizer. All shared the same wind, the same waves, and the same challenges when it came to the call of nature. There are records half humor, half cautionary tale of sailors caught off guard by a sudden gust or rogue wave, trousers around their ankles, pitching headfirst into the sea. Whether these stories are fact or the ancient equivalent of maritime jokes, historians still argue. But as you perch there, the spray damp on your face and the gulls wheeling overhead, it's easy to see how such accidents might happen. The sea shows little mercy for the unwary. You finish your business, rising carefully, brushing salt spray from your tunic, and returning to the relative safety of the main deck. The ship sails on, the toilet beam swaying at the prow like a silent challenge to all who dare use it. And you, perhaps, have earned a little more respect for the hardy souls who lived and worked upon the waves, managing not only the dangers of storm and battle, but the daily humbling necessities of life at sea. Your feet find firm ground again as you step off the gangplank, leaving behind the salt and spray of the ship. The city walls rise ahead, but tonight their grandeur is marred by a darker mood. The gates are shut, the streets eerily still, and the air hums with tension. Romor, perhaps one of its distant provincial cousins, lies under siege. And in this state of fear and confinement, the ordinary problem of where to relieve oneself becomes a matter of survival. Because when enemies lurk beyond the walls, even the simple act of using the toilet takes on a new urgency and new dangers. You move through narrow streets crowded with makeshift barricades, overturned carts, and anxious citizens. Every well, every food store is guarded, every resource rationed, and waste. Waste is a problem no one can ignore. Great public foricae, the bathhouse latrines, even the private toilets of the rich all now potential hazards. The water that once carried filth away might be cut off. The sewers, once a marvel of cleanliness, could back up without the flow that kept them clear. The smell alone is a reminder of how close discomfort is to disaster. You follow a group of residents toward one of the makeshift solutions, a trench hastily dug within the walls, lined with whatever materials could be found. Planks, stones, even shattered bits of pottery. Here, under cover of darkness, people relieve themselves as quickly as they can. The trench positioned to keep the waste away from drinking water and food stores. But the stench spreads, carried by the breeze. Disease whispers at the city's edges, waiting for a chance to take hold. Historians still argue whether it was siege conditions or the toilets themselves that bred the plagues that sometimes followed these long encirclements. The wealthy fare no better. Their private facilities overflow. Their slaves overwork trying 2 empty chamber pots discreetly, carrying the contents to pits, dug in courtyards or gardens, now ruined by constant use. Some homes attempt to seal off latrines entirely, turning to chamber pots as a safer, if messier, solution. But even these require emptying, and the streets grow foul as refuse piles up faster than it can be managed. And then there's the risk of desperation. Some citizens, driven by need, sneak out through hidden posterns or crumbling sections of wall to relieve themselves beyond the city limits. A dangerous choice, as enemy archers lie in wait or patrols prowl the dark. There are tales, grim, but perhaps true, of those cut down while squatting behind a bush, caught at their most vulnerable. Whether these stories are fact or fable, scholars still debate, but they capture the horror of siege life, no task too small to end in tragedy. Inside the walls, the sewers themselves become both a curse and a hope. Some brave souls attempt to escape through the tunnels, wading through waist-deep filth in search of freedom or rescue.
Eczema.
Once a symbol of Rome's mastery over nature, becomes a desperate exit route, its darkness hiding both dangers and dreams. And as you stand near one of these grates, you can almost hear the hushed voices of those who dared its depths. The scrape of feet on stone. The silent prayer that the enemy wouldn't guess their plan. You retreat from the trench, the smell clinging to your clothes, and glance up at the night sky. The stars shine coldly above, indifferent to the suffering below. The city waits, hungry and weary, its people learning that even the most basic needs become fraught in times of war. And as you make your way back toward the relative shelter of a doorway, you reflect on how fragile civilization is, how easily the comforts of marble benches and flowing water give way to pits and stench when the world turns hostile. The siege lifts, the city breathes again, and you find yourself wandering Rome's streets in gentler times. The sun warms the paving stones, the fountains gurgle cheerfully, and a faint breeze carries the mingled scents of baking bread and fresh-cut herbs. And tonight, your nose will guide you into an unexpectedly refined side of Roman toilet culture, the little rituals, perfumes, and aromatic tricks that people use to mask the less than pleasant realities of public and private latrines. Because even in matters of waste, Romans never missed a chance for a touch of elegance. You step into a well-kept foricae near a market square, and at first you're bracing yourself for the usual assault on your senses. But to your surprise, the air is lighter here. A faint fragrance of myrtle, maybe rosemary, or even imported frankincense drifts through the space. A small brazier smolders in the corner, its coals slowly consuming a blend of herbs, the smoke working valiantly to tame the underlying odors. The attendant nods to you as he adds another pinch, the gesture as practiced as any priest at an altar. Historians still argue whether these aromatic additions were common practice or a luxury found only in the better parts of town. But evidence from literature and surviving tools, small bronze burners, scented oil flasks suggests that Romans, like us, disliked a foul-smelling toilet and took steps to improve the atmosphere where they could.
Egg.
You can almost picture the wealthier patrons wrinkling their noses, waving a perfumed handkerchief as they settled onto the marble seat. In private homes, the effort went further. A well-appointed villa might have a designated shelf in the toilet room for little vials of oil or baskets of dried herbs, while a slave could be instructed to burn incense before or after use, or to sprinkle scented water on the floor. Some households even kept pots of aromatic plants near the latrine door. Lavender, basil, rue to provide a natural air freshener. And while the sponge stick still did its humble duty, it wasn't unusual to find a jar of perfumed rinse water set aside. For more fastidious users, whether this actually made much difference or simply gave the illusion of cleanliness, scholars continue to debate. You lower yourself onto the familiar stone, breathing in the faint temps of burned cedar mingled with the salt and vinegar aroma of the sponge bucket. It's a strange but not unpleasant mix, earthy, sharp, with just enough sweetness to take the edge off. Outside the doorway, you hear the quiet murmur of a fountain, the chatter of passers-by, the low clop of hooves on stone. For a moment, you could almost forget where you are, And let's not overlook the toilet's role in Roman hospitality. Guests visiting a fine home might judge the host not only by the feast offered, but by the care taken in these small details. A clean, sweet-smelling latrine spoke of refinement, good taste, and consideration for others. A neglected one?
Oh.
Let's just say gossip flowed as easily as water down the cloaca maxima. The Romans understood the power of impressions, even in the most private of spaces. You glance around and spot a little graffiti. Scratched into the wall near the door, a crude drawing of a sponge stick crowned with a laurel wreath. A joke, perhaps, or a tribute to a particularly well-kept latrine. Either way, it brings a smile as you rise. Adjust your tunic, and take one last deep breath of the perfumed air. Outside, the breeze carries the mingled scents of the city, and you reflect on how, even in the most functional corners of life, Rome found ways to weave in beauty, ritual, and pride. Whether for comfort, cleanliness, or just to keep up appearances, the sweet-smelling toilet was another reminder that in Rome, no detail was too small for care. Your sandals crunch along a dusty road now, far beyond the walls of the imperial capital. The hum of Rome fades behind you as the landscape opens. Rolling fields. Strange dialects in the air, the scent of unfamiliar spices mingling with wood smoke. Tonight, you journey into the provinces. Those far-flung corners of the empire where Roman ways met local traditions, in where, yes, even the toilets told a story of cultural blending. Stubborn resistance, and occasional compromise. You arrive. At a bustling provincial town, perhaps in Gaul Britannia, or the edge of Egypt. The streets are laid out in a Roman grid. The Forum at the center, but look closer and you'll see signs of adaptation. The bathhouse is smaller, humbler. The public latrine tucked behind the market shows its wear. The stone seats are there but rougher, the sponge buckets fewer. The drainage system, not quite as tidy as back home in the capital, and yet the essentials of Roman sanitation are present, at least in towns where the empire's influence ran strong. You slip inside one of these provincial foricae. The smell is familiar, earthy, sour, but less masked by herbs or incense. A bucket sits. Askew, the sponge stick well worn. A local woman casts you a wary glance as she exits, her tunic pulled tight as if she distrusts this Roman import. And she may have good reason. In many provinces, the shared, doorless design of Roman latrines clashed with local customs of privacy and modesty. Historians still argue how eagerly these communities adopted Roman toilets, or whether they did so only under pressure from governors. It's keen to show off Roman engineering. In rural areas, the Roman latrine often remained a curiosity. You can imagine a Celtic farmer or Egyptian villager glancing at the stone seat, scratching his head and retreating to his traditional pit, latrine, or private spot behind a wall. Why change what works? And in truth, Roman sanitation wasn't always a step up. Poorly maintained sewers could clog, latrines could overflow, and in regions where water was scarce, the constant flow required for proper flushing was a luxury few could afford. But in cities where Roman rule took deeper root, you'll find signs of hybrid solutions. A bathhouse where the latrine has both stone seats and a private corner shielded by a reed screen, a nod to local preference. A temple complex where the toilets are positioned discreetly at the far end, away from the main approach, as if to keep the sacred space unsullied by bodily realities. You walk through one such bathhouse now, the mosaic floors chipped, but still beautiful, the latrine bench worn smooth. And you can feel the negotiation in the design. Roman form, provincial function, and what of the sponge? In some regions, locals resisted the communal tool altogether, preferring cloth, moss, or simply water for washing. A provincial latrine might have the bucket and stick as a token of Roman custom, but ask around, and you'll find many users. Brought their own supplies, tucked into satchels or carried by servants. The idea of sharing a sponge, not universally beloved, let's say. You pause beside a small public fountain, watching as townsfolk fill jars, rinse vegetables, and splash their faces. A child plays nearby, his mother calling him back before he strays too close to the latrine entrance. The empire's reach was long, But in matters of daily necessity, adaptation was the name of the game. The Romans brought their toilets, their baths, or sewers butt on the edge of empire. These marvels had to coexist with the old ways. The local preferences and the stubborn logic of people who knew their land better than any imperial engineer. As you move on, the sun dips low, casting long shadows over the town's rooftops. The provincial foricae fades behind you, a small but telling marker of how Rome's influence spread, not always smoothly, not always eagerly, but always leaving its trace even in the humblest of places. The road winds back toward the heart of the empire, but this time, centuries have passed. The bustle of ancient Rome is gone, replaced by quiet ruins bathed in golden light. Crumbled columns, broken mosaics, worn marble benches, all that remains of a world once filled with voices, footsteps, and, yes, the daily sounds of bustling latrines. Tonight, you walk among these remnants, reflecting on the strange afterlife of Roman toilets and how these humble structures became treasures for modern archaeologists, puzzle pieces of a vanished civilization. You wander through the remains of a bath complex, the walls worn low, the pools long dry. But here at the edge of the ruins, the latrine survives, stone seats still lined in neat rows. The drainage channel visible beneath. Sponge sticks are long gone, of course, but the grooves where they rested are etched into the marble, silent testimony to habits forgotten by time, but rediscovered by curious minds. You lower yourself onto one of the seats not to use it, but to imagine what once was. The chatter, the routine, the very human drama that played out in this unglamorous space. Archaeologists greet these finds with excitement. Latrine isn't just a toilet, it's a window into diet, health, engineering, and daily life. Seeds, bones, and parasite eggs sifted from ancient waste tell us what Romans ate, how they lived, what diseases plagued them. Graffiti on the walls offers glimpses of humor, frustration, and fleeting loves. And the careful design of the drainage systems reveals the mind of an empire that valued order, cleanliness, and control, even over its filth. You step into a museum now, where fragments of Roman plumbing rest behind glass. A length of lead pipe, its joints soldered by hands long vanished. A terracotta sewer section, chipped but intact. A replica sponge-nestic, displayed with gentle irony beside a caption about Roman hygiene. Schoolchildren giggle as they pass. Tourists snap photos, and historians still debate, was this system as advanced as we like to think? Or was it more patchwork and problem-prone than Roman writers admitted? Outside, among the ruins, the latrines remain some of the best preserved. Parts of ancient sites? At Pompeii, at Herculaneum, at Ostia Antica, you can still see the benches, the water channels, the places where so many once sat shoulder to shoulder. And in their endurance, there's something oddly fitting. The grand temples crumbled. Palaces fell. But the toilets? They persist. Reminders that empires are built not just on triumphs and tragedies, but on the simple, shared necessities of daily life. You pause one last time at a ruined foricae. The marble cool beneath your fingertips. The setting sun casting long shadows across the stone. You can almost hear the echo of ancient voices, the splash of water, the faint clatter of sandals on wet floors. The latrine, empty now, offers its final lesson, that in the end, what unites us across centuries isn't glory or conquest, but the quiet, unremarkable routines that made life possible. And so, as the sky fades from gold to deep blue, you turn away from the ancient toilet, leaving behind the ruins and the stories they still whisper, and carry with you the odd comfort that even Rome's most humble places have their place in history. Word. Count. 1085 now, as we near the end of tonight's journey. Let your mind drift with the soft breeze that once stirred the curtains of a Roman villa. Picture those ancient streets empty now, bathed in silver moonlight, the sounds of the city. Quiet at last. The fountains still trickle gently, the baths lie silent, and even the latrines. Those humble witnesses to everyday life rest in peace beneath the stars. Feel your breath slow, your body grow heavy, as if you, too, are settling into the stillness of a long-forgotten world, but the distant hum of history fade to a gentle murmur at the edge of your thoughts. The roads of Rome stretch away into the night, endless and serene, waiting for tomorrow's footsteps. But for now, you are safe, at ease, surrounded by the soft hush of the past. Close your eyes and let sleep claim you as the ancient city slumbers on. End of script. Sweet dreams.